Welcome to the Mindrise Podcast, the catalyst that takes you from who you are right now to all that you can become. Hey guys, I'm really excited about this episode of the Mindrise Podcast. We've got Caroline Zwickson joining us to talk about the concept of a self-quest, what it means to find calm space. And I know that this feels so elusive. For so many of us, the concept of calm feels like it only belongs to like a monk who's on the top of a mountain without any Wi-Fi. And that's not exactly true. Calm is available to you as well. Caroline is going to walk us through how to find that and also what holds us back from accessing it. So join me on this episode of the Mindrise Podcast. We're diving in and we're going to get out of our own way. I hope you enjoy. Well, I am very excited to have you on because I have known you for a while now. 10 plus years, pre-kids?
Probably 12, yeah, I think 12.
Yeah, at least. And of course, following you on social media and getting your emails and your Christmas cards too over the years. And there was that recent email that came through and it had those words self-quest on it. And it landed, Caro. It was just like, hold on a second. Are we cognizant of our self-quest was my question. But I'd love for you to share with us, like, where did the idea of self-quest even come from and what does it actually mean?
Yeah. Oh, I love that question. I don't think anyone has ever really asked me that question. So I started the self-quest emails in the beginning of this year. And I kind of like actually sat with myself sort of at the end of last year where I was sort of, like taking inventory of where I was in my own life and what brought me joy and where I felt like I wanted to go in my own sort of like journey professionally, of course, also personally across the whole board. And so one of the things that came up is I love when people ask me good questions. And like it's something that's so simple, but like the most fun, like whatever it is, like dinner parties, walks with friends, like even conversations with like my kids' teachers and like parent-teacher conference. Like if there's good questions, like I feel like it just gives so much energy and you get so much out of it and you get so much back. And so then I was like, well, what if I write an email every week and I call it the self-quest? And it's a question that I offer to my audience. And it's simply like to take inventory of yourself, to explore yourself, to get to know yourself. Because I think at the end of the day, there's nothing more powerful than really knowing yourself. Like when I think about people who have confidence, like that kind of authentic confidence, not the sort of like fake it till you make it confidence, like those people always know themselves really well. They know that what they like, they know what they don't like, they know how to find their people because they have this sort of like self-awareness that just radiates out of them. And then you can lead your life and build your life from this really authentic place. And so that's really how the idea of the self-quest was born. It started with just loving good questions and then kind of led to what I do in my work, which is really all about helping people explore themselves and through that figure out how to get unstuck in their life and clear in terms of what they actually want to build and create.
So I've got a million questions because I'm absolutely with you. I do find that the quality of our life is directly connected to the depth of the questions that we even ask ourselves. And of course, in relationship, right? You had a question that you tossed out this past week. How have your past relationships shaped the way you connect with people now? And I loved that question. I find, and I really want your input, that the implication isn't that we're just on an island onto our own, but that we're relating with other people and it's creating a ripple effect in our life. But I'd be curious, like, where do the questions come from for you? And how does one feed into another?
Yeah. So the questions, so I spend a lot of time, like let me back up. What I find really valuable for my own sort of like processes and organizing my own thoughts and eliminating distraction in my own life is really creating calm space for myself. I go on a lot of walks, like that's sort of like my thing. And I have actually challenged myself not to always listen to a podcast or music or a phone call with a friend, but just allow myself to almost like come home to myself in my mind by like creating calm and quiet places. And then these questions pop up kind of like organically, either like because of something that I'm thinking about, or maybe I had a conversation with a friend or a client that I was like, oh gosh, like this is such a profound topic. And I sort of like, you know how like you have those light bulb moments where you're like, oh, like the question was so good. And then you want to offer it to more people, you know? So it's, I don't know, it's not like one specific place where I get the questions from. It's more sort of like a very colorful mix of just life stuff, like all the things um, that contribute to us leading satisfying lives. You know, at one point, like my inner critic came in, and I was like, I should be more organized. Like it should, like this question should build on the next question, and all this stuff. You know how you get into your own thoughts like that. But I'm a person who loves variety. I love novelty. I like when things are kind of like colorful and you switch them up a little bit. And so I just gave myself permission to do the self-quest emails in the same way and format.
I love that though. I do find, and I'm with you, in the very beginning of anything, we can feel like we're in this imposter syndrome or we have to get it right. I think that's my inner like rising Virgo or whatever it's supposed to be. But I want to be organized about it. But I'm with you. I think that the very organic nature, it creates connection, right?
Yeah.
It's like, okay, here's this question was either presented to me or I'm asking it of myself. I wonder if anyone else is asking this question.
Yeah.
So let's back the train all the way up, though. How did you tell us about your work and how did you even get into the work that you're in?
Yeah. So, gosh, how far back do we want to go? So so I was actually kind of on my, not kind of, I was on the way to go to medical school. And so I did pre-med and then really found myself exhausted by the end of, I did a 2 year sort of intense program in New York with pre-med because my parents are both doctors, my grandparents were doctors, and I was like, oh, I'm going to continue this legacy of doctors, like, you know, all the things. And was really burnt out by the end and didn't enjoy working with the doctors that I like worked for and trained with. Um, and so many times I found a lot of these New York doctors kind of like, you know, rushing around, prescribing a whole bunch of medication. And I was like, but I want to ask questions. Like, I want to ask these patients all these questions about their lives and what started this whole whatever health issue they were facing. And so when I graduated from my program, I myself had an injury. I had a lower back injury. I had herniated discs in my lower spine. And so I went back to my home country of Germany and had surgery there. And my mom gave me this book. The title, if I translate it, was Illness as the Language of the Soul. And it like completely shifted me. Like I remember like lying, like recovering from the surgery and lying on this bed and just bawling, crying, reading about how the spine embodies perfect harmony in life. And like it's masculine and feminine forces stacked on top of each other. And when they're in harmony, the spine is healthy and life works. And when you have a herniated disc, there's no space for the feminine. There's no space for play or joy or flexibility and creativity and all those things that, you know, were so true for me in my life. It was all achievement focused and external accolades and like really only feeling good about myself when someone else gave me whatever, like a good grade or praise or was proud of me in some way, you know? And so this is in my early 20s. And then ended up deciding to withdraw my med school applications and got my master's in counseling psychology. And that was like really a 180 where, you know, I was in this very academic environment and then switched to a very more like kind of like hippie-ish institute in the Santa Barbara mountains, like studying dreams and the mind-body connection and family dynamics and all those things, but I loved it. And then graduated from that program. And while I loved psychology, in my own therapy during that time too, I got to a point where I was like, okay, we've talked about the past enough. Like, what am I going to do about like all this stuff? Like, how am I actually going to kind of like look forward and build what I want to build in my life? And so then I heard about life coaching, and that was really new at the time. So this is like over 12 years ago. Like there really weren't that many people, and it kind of sounded like so different, but also kind of edgy and fun. And I was like, I'm going to look into this. And the more I did, the more I realized that my whole sort of like personality and who I am fits really well with life coaching. And so I pivoted into life coaching pretty much right after I graduated from my master's program, and over the years have added women's health coaching into it and sort of combining this mind body work. And then in more recent years have taken a more creative approach, like where I work a lot with like creative expression and sort of tying in self exploration and mindfulness with sort of like a piece of creative expression, to really ground like all the realizations that we otherwise just have in our mind, you know?
Right.
So that's the long answer.
I love it. I love it. I appreciate you sharing that perspective with us because zoomed out, it makes complete sense. But I'd be curious, like when you were actually in it and you're like, my family, my parents are doctors, my grandparents are doctors, like doctors is what we do and who we are. Like, and then having to, and we have so many people who listen to the podcast that have been down this road or on this road right now, where it's just like there's a certain expectation of you,
Yeah.
whether you've put it on yourself or it's just been passed down to you, right? That you're going to do X, right? This is what you're going to do. So I'd be curious, going back in time a bit, like being honest with yourself. And I don't know, educate us. Did you know that there was like what's behind door number two? Or at the time when you realized that this might not be the path for you, how did you come to that place of honesty with yourself? And
Yeah.
how did you give yourself permission to consider what else is possible?
Yeah. I mean, it was really hard. It was a really, really hard time in my life. I was really nervous about, disappointing like my parents, disappointing my family, disappointing all the people who were like talking about me being like the third generation doctor, like all, like there was so much pressure. But I think my body just, and I don't think, you know what? I don't think I would have withdrawn my med school applications if I didn't have to go and have surgery. In some ways, because my body was in so much pain and I had this like almost like very clear external reason to just press pause or be forced to stop. And then my mom giving me this book and sort of me having this sort of like, it was like in some ways like a breakdown, I don't know that my mind would have been strong enough in my early 20s to press pause on my own. You know what I mean? And so that's sort of the gift that my body gave me, even though it was in the form of pain, it was a gift. Because I don't think I would have pivoted paths. And I don't think, and then I would have never like met my husband and had like my kids and like have sort of like this flexibility in time. Like now I'm so grateful that that happened. But at the time when it happened, it was really hard. And I felt a lot of anger at my body at first for failing me, and then I think throughout my master's program, it was a lot of healing, that a lot of dissecting our family dynamics and how sort of like these pressures maybe run in my family or like in our, also like in my family system, in our society, how it's easy to sort of look at our lives through the eyes of external observers. And so a lot of my work back then was really coming back and like sitting behind here primarily instead of like out here watching myself. You know what I mean?
Right.
Um,
Right.
but it's hard. It's hard. It takes a lot of courage. But what I found is that people actually weren't as disappointed as I thought they would be. So I think you can also, you like build it up in your own mind. And it's like, it's so easy to over dramatize things in your own mind. And then once you actually go out and try things and make new choices and try on something different, like your surroundings a lot of times actually don't respond the way that you were so scared they would.
Right. It's funny. You nailed it. We built up the story in our head.
Mm.
Everyone's going to be disappointed. Everyone's going to be devastated. And I think that accepting the responsibility of being the author of your story, it's a
Mhm.
big one. And to your point, like who you were in your 20s, I mean, that was terrifying. And whether you're in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, beyond, there becomes this pivot point where we've got a lot of stories in our head and they're influencing the way in which we put one foot in front of the other, in front of the other. And you're right. If you didn't, there could be a sliding doors version of your life
Yes,
going on right now,
exactly.
right? Where you didn't have an injury and you just continue to walk the path. So I think that no matter when you get the aha, that place of giving yourself permission to actually walk through. So from then, did you know, like, okay, it's not from the neck down, it's going to be from the neck up. I'm going to study the mind. Was it a natural transition for you, or was it even like from having to have your own pause and your own pivot that the tools that you were using to help you heal led you into that direction? Or like, was it organic for you?
To choose to get my master's in psychology.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was like my mom. So I mentioned she's a doctor, but she was running clinics for rehabilitation. So she's done a lot of psychology. So I was exposed to that world quite a lot. And I've always, I think, once I started looking into the program that I ended up doing, it was very clear. Like I've always been so curious about the mind and what people were secretly thinking. And like I love hearing people's stories and the things that happen to them and why they are the way they are and why they do what they do and all those things. And so I think as soon as I sort of opened that little door, like that little possibility, it was sort of like floodgates open. And it was like, yes, like this is where like I find myself feeling at home, you know?
Right. Right, right.
Um,
It's I remember in this video I saw years ago. It was, I don't know, on Facebook or YouTube. And it's I don't know if you've ever seen it. It was very popular. And essentially it is the GoPro of a little kid who
mhm,
is getting ready to go down just a huge slope.
mhm,
Is he or she is at the top, and it's, okay, you can do it. Okay, don't be scared. I know you're scared, but don't be scared. You can do it. You can make it. And I mean, it might have been ski jumping if my memory is serving me correctly. When we're talking at least over a decade ago that I saw this video, we all have that internal voice.
mhm,
We all have it. And you're right. Once you actually went down, right? Tip the skis over and
mhm.
and started to make your descent to make the jump, it all fell into place and made so much sense.
Yeah.
How often, I mean, in life, for a multitude of reasons, do we kind of sit at the top? Where I like to think of it as, sitting on the side of the pool, right?
Yeah.
I'm not even put my feet in. I don't even know, and because it's all that chatter.
Mhm.
So how does the concept, I'm bringing it full circle now, how does the concept of the self-quest, how does that start to address what we can all navigate with the noise in our head?
I think one of my biggest hopes with it, and something I find, is if you can just give yourself permission to slow down your mind for like a little bit of time to focus on something and go deep, right? Like I think in our society, like it's so much surface living. Like there's a like it's like the death by 2 minute tasks. You know what I mean? Like especially as parents, like there's so much small stuff everywhere. Like I call it brain confetti. Like sometimes your brain just feels like confetti. And I think if we can give ourselves time, like whether you take the self-quest question of the week or whatever, and you go on a walk and you really focus on trying to think about how does this sit with me? How does this question make me feel? Like what comes up for me organically, and just allow that. Or if you can spend a little bit of time writing down what comes up for you, I think that's even more powerful, because when you're writing, you can't think as fast. And so it forces your mind to just slow down a little bit and just be with one thing, and one thing about yourself and with yourself for an extended period of time. I think that that's really, really powerful in terms of just organizing our thoughts. Like I don't know how many people like we see who feel really stuck, who say they don't know what they want, but it's really because their mind is going so fast that they can't hear themselves. So I think that's really, when I think about the biggest part of my work now, is I give people a calm space and a quiet space where they can sort of unpack all the things that are going on slowly so we can actually look at them. Because when we always just think about it, we go so fast that sometimes we miss maybe the most golden nuggets in our own thoughts, you know?
You couldn't be more right, right? That permission, and I wrote it down, the way you said it was beautiful. That permission to slow down, that
Mm-hmm.
permission to go deep. And I love the phrase. I hope everybody starts to use it, the mind confetti, because it's that load. We don't have a mental load. There's no saying like, and you do this one thing and you don't have a mental load anymore. No. But how much of that mind confetti are you going to allow yourself to be available for?
Right.
And
And identifying, also like identifying what your triggers are, right? Like I think not everyone's mind confetti is caused by the same things. Like for some people, it is like having an overfilled, overbooked schedule. For other people, it is like actually having like a ton of tasks and maybe even tasks on there that aren't really necessary, but that are on there maybe for like a ego satisfaction perspective. For other people, it's clutter, right? Like I love feng shui. I really got into feng shui a couple of years ago and I love it. But so much of like what they describe as clutter, it's like dark energetic holes, you know, like you're not going to have a clear mind. So like wherever, like what are your triggers? And like those will let you help identify your starting point in creating a little more space, like mental space, so that you can like know yourself and make choices with clarity and confidence, you know?
right. Let's go deeper in that. Like walk us through because you're hitting on a really important one. And for everyone who's listening, I always think that if I'm going to spend the time to listen to a podcast, like I want to make even the slightest, smallest change or aha accessible. So what you're talking about is huge, right? Identifying your triggers. And you gave us a couple of good examples, but I'm curious, Carol, like how do you actually identify your triggers? Is that something that happens in your body? Is it something that happens in your mind? What's that like? What's that process? Walk us through that. How do we identify our triggers? Because
Yeah.
especially if we've been on the treadmill of life and it's just confetti all over the place, like the Tinker Tape Parade, how do we even discern what your triggers are? What's that look
Yeah.
like?
Yeah. I think it goes back to really building awareness and like paying attention to your body. Like, you know, when you start to feel like, you know, like that kind of feeling. And it's like, well, what am I doing right now? Like, am I behind on, you know, my three to-dos because I've just scrolled on social media for 30 minutes, you know? And I know we like there's so much talk about social media and how much people spend on it, but it's true. You know, I think that it's a huge time suck for people and it's not all bad. Like of course it has like its positive components as well, but it's sort of like this almost like uncontrolled like thing that we can always consume, you know? So I think taking inventory and like saying like to yourself, like, how am I spending my time? Do I allow myself daily maybe 20 minutes of just being in quiet? Like, do you, as soon as you get into your car to pick up your kids from school feel like you like need to listen to another podcast or need to consume the news or make a quick call or any of that? Or can you actually just drive in quiet? Or does that feel uncomfortable? You know, so starting to become curious about your patterns and how you fill up your space. Because at the end of the day, like this is your life, this is your space, this is your time. Like that should be handled so with like so preciously, you know, and like becoming aware of how you spend your time and what sort of gets you into this like hamster wheel where you're like, like that kind of feeling, you know?
100%. So, from what I'm hearing, like we have to pay attention to those patterns, pay
Mm-hmm.
attention to how we're filling up our space, and pay attention to our body. Right. I almost think of it when I'm on the treadmill, right? So I'm a sprinter. I'm not a distance person. I like to sprint. And so when I'm on the treadmill, I want to do the fastest mile I possibly can, or the fastest 2 miles I possibly can. So I'll get it up to, and my treadmill, it does six, or excuse me, 7.6. 7.6, I'm trucking along. 7.8, I'm like really feeling myself. A good song comes on, or I'm trying to really eke that less time or more miles in less time, I'll push it up to like an 8.1, 8.3. But
Mhm.
8.3, I can only do it for a short period of time, but I'm almost shuddering in how fast that I'm doing it. It's not sustainable. I will not be running an entire mile like that. But what you're saying, I very much relate to of that, like, ooh, it's that feeling
Mhm.
that we get within our body. And you're right, a lot of times we just become so used to it that we ignore it
Yeah.
rather than hearing that it's not actually sustainable. And that's us identifying a trigger.
Right, right. And so sometimes this is, I love what you're saying here because a lot of times people tell me that they carved out this time for themselves to like, just like eliminate the distractions and just give themselves calm time, and it doesn't feel good, right? Like we walk around and we're like, oh, I just wish I had time to myself and do nothing. But if you actually give yourself the time to be by yourself and do nothing, it kind of feels wrong and uncomfortable because we're so trained and like that. We're so familiar with being overly busy and in that sort of like anxious, adrenaline filled mode that once that dissipates and we have empty space, it doesn't feel good. And we almost feel a little lost in that much space, you know?
100%. 100%. We had an interview with Vanessa Scotto a couple podcasts ago, and she's saying the exact same thing in the sense that, on one hand, the thing that we need in order to get off this merry-go-round is the
Yeah,
calm space, right? Is that quiet time, is that do nothing. And the thing that terrifies us and that we want to fill right up, or to your point, which I love, and I want to
yeah,
pull on that thread a little bit, we feel guilty about
totally. Yeah.
is the calm space. So
No.
I'm curious, right? I want to jump to asking you, how do you create calm space? But Carol, before I do, like, what's happening there for us?
Why we have a hard time doing that?
Yeah, what's happening there?
I mean, I think we as a society are addicted to productivity, and I think especially in the US. I mean, I grew up in Europe and of course it's changed since I've moved from there, but even now when we go back, my husband's also from Europe, so when we go back in the summers, it is a different pace. Like people in the US are definitely, I think, equating their worth with their productivity, right? But I think where we get it wrong a lot of times is that we always think more is better instead of focusing on quality, right? Like I had this sort of epiphany a couple of years ago when I have three little kids where it was just, I felt like I was so busy, like doing too many things. And I realized that I want to do less things, but I want to do the things I am doing really well. And that's when you feel satisfied. It's almost like that's how the circle comes back to you. And like energy can fill you back up because you feel satisfied about the things that you've done because you feel like you did them well instead of doing a million things, like kind of, but you're always sort of like sacrificing some one thing for another and like kind of like playing chess back and forth all the time. By the end of the day, you're just burned out and exhausted. You don't even get to reap the benefit of all of your hard work because you feel like you're still behind on everything. And that's not a sustainable way of living. That's not a sustainable way to nurture our creativity. Like that will lead to burnout. And so I think also having that conversation with yourself, like, do you want quantity or do you want quality? And I think as we get older, that conversation looks different too from when we were younger. And a lot of the quantity maybe consists of wanting to try out a million things, but then you get to know yourself a little bit better. And it's easier to say no to certain things because you just know that it's not your thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's one of the great self-quest questions is that quantity over quality.
Mm-hmm.
And you're right, the quality of the way that we answer that question is often derived from just knowing ourselves, yeah, and knowing our yes and knowing our no.
Yeah.
That's tremendously valuable. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So you're selling me on creating calm space for sure. And I've recognized those times when I get in the car and without even thinking about it, right? I'm just going for pickup, wrapped up my work day. I'm going for pickup. Maybe I'm running on time. Maybe I'm running a couple minutes behind time, which is one of my triggers. That's when I get myself here.
Yeah.
And for a long time, I've noticed myself turning off the radio. at that particular time of day. On
Yeah.
the drive to school, I don't necessarily turn the radio off, but I'm finding myself turning it off when I'm leaving my work and headed to change channels, put a different hat on, be in a different environment, go into, as I call mom o'clock. Um,
Hmm.
and without even knowing it, it's almost an intentional like need for that calm space.
Yeah.
What are some ways that either you create calm space or you've seen your clients create calm space that is not another thing on our to-do list? Because I know that that would probably be if you said, okay, Bailey, you need to go for a 2 hour dead silent walk. I don't have time. Not
Like,
gonna
I
happen.
will not.
But I'm just curious, like how did calm space come into your life and how have you made it accessible? What are some of
Hmm.
those calm space ways that you built it in?
Yeah. I think there's almost like different tiers of it. Like, so for example, I'm writing a blog post and maybe I have a time boxed for it's going to be an hour. I can either run into my office and be like, oh, I have an hour. I need to like bang this out, da, 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 da. Or I can sit down at my desk. I can maybe light a little candle. I can like play some like relaxing, calm music that like helps me get into a writer's mode. And it's like, it's almost more a way of life than it is like, you got to be calm for 10 minutes and the rest of your life can be total chaos. You know what I mean? I think of it more as like just the way you do things. Like, do you approach things with kind of like a sturdy and calm mind? And of course, it's not always possible. Like, I have plenty of times when like all of my kids are like running into different directions and it's mayhem. You know what I mean? But where you have influence over it, like, how can you make things just a little bit calmer and like more intentional and present, right? So it could be like making dinner, like, and you can say to yourself, like, right now I'm just chopping the cucumbers, like while the kids are playing or doing something or like watching a show. But like the intention behind it is like, I'm going to do this calmly because what you're going to save like 20 seconds by chopping it fast and feeling really stressed about it, or just having this more sort of like calmer mindset of like, I'm making dinner for my family. So I think it's a mindset switch more than anything. It's more than like, doing carving, trying to carve out like a 2 hour walk of like complete silence every day, which is impossible. And then you find these pockets where like maybe like what my kids love, because we talk about this in my family, like now that it's getting warmer outside and nicer outside, we go on walks together and like we forage like through the forest and like they look for salamanders and roll over every tree stem, but we seek out spaces like in nature that are calm and that are grounding. um so those are little things. And then I think those transition times, like school pickups, like running an errand, like make it nice for yourself. Like if you're running an errand and it's going to take 15 minutes either way, like try to approach things with a calmer mindset, with like thinking of it like I'm giving myself a little bit of calm space on the drive to Walgreens or whatever. So I
Right.
think it's more of a way of life than the
Then,
magical pocket of time.
right, right. I know it's it's alluring to insert it in in the chaos, right? Like, let me just hurry up and put my calm space in here. Um,
Yeah.
and you're right, like trying to add it as a to-do list item is also a real turnoff. It sounds like it's a conation. It sounds like it's a way in which we do something, the way in
Hmm.
which we approach. We don't have to add it to the mix. Like you
Right.
said, I love it. It's the chopping that, like, what are you going to save? 20 seconds chopping those
Yeah.
cucumbers faster? But instead, that really intentional because I know that, I'm probably in good company. We've all had those moments when we've either driven somewhere on autopilot and I couldn't even have told you how many houses I passed or if there was one of the houses on fire because I'm on autopilot to get there. Or like I've finished my lunch and I didn't even barely taste it because I was just so busy.
Going
So
through the motions. Yeah.
right. So I love what you're saying about like giving yourself that permission to slow down.
Yeah.
It's the way in which you chop the cucumbers.
Right. And like what ties into this beautifully actually is and what I focus a lot on is joy. So like I have a podcast called Joy Class. And I think what's so important about that is almost like leading a joy-filled life, you know? And like this concept of joy, like it's actually available to us everywhere if we're looking, but we're not looking because we're running on autopilot, you know? But if we, like I call it our joy channels, if we open our joy channels, it gives so much energy, you know? And I think so it's one, building the awareness for a calm space or joy opportunities, like even like driving by a beautiful house can be like a moment of joy, you know, like watching the flowers pop out, moments of joy. Like it's really accessible and available everywhere, enjoying your lunch, like all those things. So one is like having an awareness for those types of things and making the choice, but the other one is also protecting it, right? And I think that's where sort of like this multitude of distractions that we talked about earlier also comes in, you know, like be fiercely protective over how you walk through your life, you know. And so setting boundaries with people, with opportunities, with spaces, with whatever you need to set boundaries with, and sticking to them, and you know, being in tune with what actually needs to be on your to-do list and what just doesn't, you know?
Right. Right. That boundaries, I mean, we can do an entire podcast about boundaries
Totally.
in and of itself. But how do you set boundaries in your life? Do they come from a place of, I know I need, or do they come from a place of, I'm not available for? What's that look like for you?
Mhm. So I've had a tricky relationship with boundaries because I'm a people pleaser, right? And like growing up, like very people pleaser-ish. Um, and so I always like I felt so much anxiety saying no because I was like scared that I was going to hurt someone else's feelings or that they would, I don't know, perceive me as like not strong enough or smart enough or whatever to do something, you know? And so for me, it was really hard to say no and to sort of like distance myself a little bit from things that just didn't have space in my life. And so I definitely for many years was running in this sort of like hamster wheel or this like super fast treadmill of overdoing, overgiving, over pleasing, and then feeling completely depleted at the end of the day. And so how the way I started is by saying, let me think about it,
Mm.
because I couldn't in the moment, like for me to come up with a magical no, like felt almost like too hard. And so I said, like, let me think about it. And then, you know, what if I, and then I also gave myself space to actually think about, do I want to take this on? Does it make sense? Am I going to be able to do a good job? Like, will I be able to do it well? Is it meaningful to me? Like all of those questions. And do I
Right.
like realistically, like, do I actually have time to put something else into my life and still do all the other things well? Like, am I still going to be present with my kids? You know, like all those questions. So I bought myself time. That was my first strategy to like setting boundaries. And then coming back and really embracing boundaries as something that you can say with elegance and with grace, and not something that, you know, because I think the way you respond is either going to make the other person offended or not. And so I think really playing with communication skills and explaining things in a way that was kind and considerate, because nobody wants you on the job if you already know that you don't have time for it and you're going to do a bad job. You know what I mean? So
Sure.
I
Sure.
think I think playing with that has been really helpful for me.
Right. And I also loved how you said, you removed that initial anxiety around the magical no with the let
Yeah.
me think about it. Um, Not because you're avoiding saying no so much as you're giving yourself that spaciousness to see, does this actually fit for me?
And also what feels authentic for me when I set boundaries, because my relationships are important to me and I want to honor and value the other person. And
Right.
so it was really important to me to find ways of expressing a no or saying no that felt good instead of spur of the moment. You know, I need it, and now I'm better at it because I've practiced for many years. But initially, I really just had to buy myself a little bit of time to figure out how that fit for me, you
Right.
know?
Right. And that makes sense, right? But if we don't have a relationship with ourselves, it's hard to even know what our no looks like or feels like because we just haven't had that conversation internally in order to share it with another.
Yeah. Yeah. So like self-knowledge, it's all the power.
It's all the power, right? And then again, full circle moment. And we will deepen that self-knowledge when we have time, right? When
Mhm.
we invite in those calm spaces.
Yeah.
And to the original, point of, we leave ourselves available for that self-quest, asking
Yeah.
ourselves the questions that are going to help us to grow.
Right. And it never gets boring because you change. Like just because you knew the answer to a question for yourself like 10 years ago, you might have to revisit it because you might have evolved and changed away from that original response, you know?
Right, right. So as we wrap things up, I am going to toss your own question over to you. You said when you shared on the Self Quest, how have your past relationships shaped the way you connect with people now? What answer starts to reveal itself for you on that one?
So, how my past relationships have shifted or changed the way I connect with people now. I
Yeah.
think in so many past relationships, like, and I mentioned this already, like I've been such a people pleaser where I overextended myself and bent myself backwards and was like not a very like I wasn't clear on what I needed at all. And then I was surprised that nobody gave me what I want, gave me what I actually needed, you know? So it was kind of like, I think a lot of that happened in my childhood, but then also in my first sort of like romantic relationships where I was so consumed with wanting to be loved and liked that I was a chameleon, you know? And that is so easy for me to access still, you know, like it's so easy for me to find myself in that with like when I connect with people now that it's easy for me to kind of think about, did they like me? Like, did I say something that offended them? Like that it's so familiar, but now I have sort of like the maturity and the awareness that I can stop those sort of like overthinking thoughts and can distance myself a little bit and then ask myself, did I enjoy their company? Did I actually feel like I could be who I really am? Like, do we have similar senses of humor? Like, you know, and so that has really helped me to grow away from being sort of like a bend over people pleaser chameleon person and realizing that that's not actually that doesn't work in relationships, right? Like I think sometimes I think of relationships as puzzle pieces, and like if you're a puzzle piece that's round, like nothing can actually stick to it,
Right.
right? Versus if you're a defined puzzle piece with like all these nooks and crannies, like you can only attract what's really meant for you, and you're going to hook in tight. Versus being kind of like so smooth on the surface that like nothing actually sticks, you know?
That's a great analogy. And I love that you said to grow, because that's what the whole thing is about. Whether
Yeah.
we are calm spacing or we're self-questing, whatever our own evolution is, it comes by way of growth. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I love this conversation. And again, we can have like 10 more podcasts about people
I know.
saying no and our boundaries. I love it. I love it. So, Kara, where can everybody find you? I know you shared about the Joy Class podcast, and I'll make sure that all this good stuff's in the notes. But
Oh,
tell
thank
us
you.
as we wrap up, like, where can we find you? Where are you hanging out on the internet?
So my website is carolinezwickson.com. And then on Instagram, I'm instagram.com/Caro Zwickson.
Love it. Love it. Love it. And yes, so I will make sure that we tag Caroline and everything so you guys can check her out and check out her work and check out the Joy Class podcast, because I think that that's what it's all about. It's the ingredients that we're putting into ourselves that
Mm.
create this life, right? Because it's how, to your point, how we fill up our time. We have to pay attention to this life that we are filling up.
Yeah, totally.
Thank you
Thanks so much
so
for
much for
having
being
me.
with us.
Thank
I love
you.
it. I love it. Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Mindrise Podcast. Check out our show notes for details and to get in on the latest at Mindrise. Visit us on Instagram at the Mindrise